Amelia Bennett was a beloved swimming instructor in South London, known not only for her skill in the water but for the warm laughter that echoed through the community centre pool. For years, she coached children and adults alike, helping them overcome their fears and find joy in the water. Her days were filled with early morning swim lessons and friendly chats with neighbors. But everything changed on the night of February 21st. That evening, Amelia told a colleague she had arranged a private meeting through a dating app. She left the center around 7 p.m. and vanished without a trace. Days turned into weeks, as missing posters were taped to lampposts and tearful pleas from her family flooded social media. Then came the horrifying discovery. Her body was found submerged in an abandoned swimming complex near Croydon. Bound at the ankles, with bruises indicating a violent struggle, Amelia's once peaceful world had been replaced by a cold and chilling nightmare. In the days following Amelia Bennett's disappearance, police initially treated the case as a potential voluntary absence. There were no signs of forced entry into her apartment, no known enemies, and no immediate evidence of foul play. But as time passed, and her usual routines went unfulfilled, missed swim classes, unanswered calls, and uncollected paychecks, the tone of the investigation began to shift. The turning point came when a jogger discovered Amelia's phone and a torn piece of her jacket in a dense wooded area behind the abandoned Croydon Aquatic Sports Centre. The discovery prompted a full-scale search, and just hours later, divers recovered her lifeless body from the deep end of a drained training pool, covered in algae and broken tiles. The pool had been closed for over a decade, long forgotten by most of the local community. What truly stunned investigators was the condition in which her body was found. Her wrists and ankles were bound with nylon rope, and bruises on her shoulders indicated a fierce struggle. The autopsy revealed water in her lungs, but also signs of blunt force trauma to the back of her head. She hadn't drowned by accident. This was something far darker. Traffic camera footage from nearby showed Amelia walking briskly toward the pool that night, alone. No car followed her, no one was seen accompanying her. It was as if she vanished into thin air the moment she stepped onto that stretch of road. But upon closer inspection, a shadow, brief and fast-moving, crossed behind her just seconds before she disappeared from view. Investigators believe it may be the key to unlocking what happened next. Friends and colleagues were questioned again, but all described Amelia as careful, cautious, especially when it came to online dating. Her best friend, Zoe, recalled that Amelia had expressed hesitation about this particular meeting, saying, "He seems charming, but there's something about him that doesn't feel real." Police traced the last activity on her phone to an area near the Croydon Aquatic Sports Centre at approximately 7:42 p.m., a timeline that matched the security footage. But the most chilling clue came from Amelia's smartwatch, which had automatically recorded her heart rate. Her pulse spiked suddenly at exactly 7:45 p.m., and then stopped entirely. The evidence was undeniable. This wasn't an accident, nor was it a random act. Someone lured her there. Someone knew that pool had been abandoned. Someone wanted her to disappear, silently. As news of her death spread across London, candles and flowers piled up outside the rusted gates of the pool. What began as a missing person case had now become an active homicide investigation. And whoever did this is still out there. Just as investigators believed they had reached a dead end, an unexpected breakthrough shattered every assumption about Amelia's quiet, ordinary life. 1 week after her body was discovered, a young man walked into the Clapham police station, pale and visibly shaken. He identified himself as Elliot and claimed he had met Amelia not through a dating app, but weeks earlier on a private online survivalist forum. According to Elliot, Amelia had asked strange questions about remote locations in London, the best ways to avoid being seen, and how to escape surveillance. She told him she was researching a story, but he had a feeling she was hiding something. At first, he brushed it off, until he saw her name in the news. Investigators were stunned. None of Amelia's friends or family had mentioned anything about such behavior. But Elliot had proof: chat logs, screenshots, even voice messages. One recording stood out. In it, Amelia whispered, "I think someone's watching me. I don't know if it's all in my head, but I can feel it. He knows where I swim. He knows the way to my home." The voice note was recorded 4 days before she disappeared. Police reopened her laptop, previously considered unremarkable, but as they dug deeper into encrypted folders, they uncovered a hidden journal. In her entries, Amelia mentioned a man she referred to only as the Ferryman, a name no one recognized. She wrote, "He never speaks, just watches, always dressed in black. I saw him once outside the center. I thought I imagined it. Now I see him every night." Investigators scrambled to determine who, or what, Amelia had been afraid of. Was this Ferryman a delusion born from paranoia? Or had someone methodically inserted themselves into her life? Then came the chilling confirmation. A local resident came forward with security footage from the night Amelia disappeared. At exactly 7:48 p.m., a figure dressed entirely in black appeared briefly on camera, standing motionless at the edge of the Croydon Aquatic Sports Center. He didn't move. He simply stared out toward the street. His face was never seen. The killer was real. This discovery changed everything. The case was no longer seen as a one-time tragedy, but possibly the work of a calculated predator. If Amelia had seen him before, was she being watched? Were there other victims? As the investigation intensified, fear began to grip London. Rumors spread of a shadowy figure stalking women near pools, gyms, and public parks. Social media exploded with stories, some real, others imagined. The city was on edge. For the detectives, the pressure was mounting. Now they were chasing a ghost, someone who had operated from the shadows, knew Amelia's routines, and vanished without a trace. But one thing was certain: Amelia sensed the danger. She tried to leave breadcrumbs behind. Now, they had to follow them, before the killer found a new target. As the investigation into Amelia Bennett's death deepened, a stunning shift began to take place, not just within the Metropolitan Police, but across the entire city of London. What was once seen as a tragic, isolated incident was rapidly becoming something far more unsettling. Detective Inspector Grace Holloway, who had initially approached the case with procedural caution, soon found herself gripped by a lingering sense of dread. Amelia's hidden journal entries, her whispered fears, and the emergence of a mysterious figure known only as the Ferryman had changed everything. This was no longer about a single victim. It was about patterns, missed signals, and a potential predator hiding in plain sight. Police began re-examining unsolved cases, disappearances of women over the past decade that had never been resolved. To their astonishment, at least 3 cases shared chilling similarities. The victims were all involved in public health or fitness spaces, had reported feeling watched, and had vanished near bodies of water. In each case, no suspect had ever been identified. It was Amelia's story that connected the dots. The community felt the shift as well. At the South London Aquatic Centre where Amelia once worked, the pool had been drained and closed indefinitely. Her colleagues, once comforted by memories of her radiant smile and calm demeanor, now replayed every interaction, wondering if she had tried to warn them. She mentioned strange men a few times. One co-worker said, "I thought she was just being cautious. Now I wonder if she was being hunted." Amelia's mother, Margaret Bennett, who had once clung to hope that her daughter might return alive, now channeled her energy into something else: justice. She stood outside the police station with a framed photo of Amelia, calling for the release of surveillance footage and demanding a dedicated task force to investigate other potential victims. But perhaps the most significant shift came within the minds of the investigators themselves. They began to question not just the case, but their own blind spots. Why hadn't they looked into Amelia's online activity sooner? Why had her early fears been dismissed as anxiety? Inspector Holloway began building a psychological profile of the Ferryman, a meticulous, strategic, and patient individual. A man who studied routines, understood technology, and chose his targets with care. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a game of control. And Amelia, brave and intuitive as she was, had come terrifyingly close to exposing him. For the first time, the case was no longer just about solving a murder, it was about stopping something that was still unfolding. The community rallied behind the #JusticeForAmelia movement, while law enforcement launched a citywide surveillance review. The perspective had shifted. Amelia's death wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of a manhunt. A junior analyst with the Cyber Crimes Unit, reviewing archived server data from the now-defunct survivalist forum where Amelia had once interacted, stumbled upon a private message thread. Buried beneath layers of encrypted code was a username, NightFerry89. The name had never come up in earlier sweeps. The analyst, curious, decrypted the conversation logs and forwarded them to Grace Holloway. The exchange between Amelia and NightFerry89 began innocently enough. Discussions about escape routes in the city, unused infrastructure, and self-defense strategies. But as the conversation continued, things took a darker turn. The anonymous user began suggesting oddly specific locations, one of them being the Aquatic Sports Center, Croydon, months before Amelia's death. Amelia responded only once after that suggestion. "That place gives me chills," she wrote. "Too much darkness." It was the first concrete digital clue directly linking Amelia's death to someone. Someone who had known about the crime scene long before it became one. Police issued a court order to trace the account. The IP address, routed through multiple proxies, ultimately led them to a VPN registered in Bristol. It was traced to a former IT contractor named Dorian Walsh, who had previously worked on upgrading public surveillance systems in South London, including, chillingly, the area surrounding Croydon. He had no criminal record, no public presence, and lived alone in a cluttered apartment surrounded by old monitors and outdated equipment. When authorities raided his flat, they found something even more disturbing. Screenshots of Amelia's social media, her swim class schedule, and long-range photographs, some taken from inside the Aquatic Sports Center itself. A folder, labeled simply, Flo, contained data on 3 other women. 2 of them were reported missing. The third had died in an incident initially ruled as a drowning suicide. For Inspector Holloway and her team, this was the moment they had been hoping for, but it had to be handled perfectly. One wrong move could scare Walsh off, and he could vanish again. Surveillance teams were deployed around the clock. Undercover officers followed him, watching as he maintained a routine, shopping, walking, even jogging past the very same Aquatic Sports Center listed in his files. Then, one night, he made a mistake. He returned to the Croydon Aquatic Sports Center just after midnight. Carrying a canvas bag, he climbed over the locked gate, slipped inside, and disappeared into the darkness of the facility. Officers who had been watching moved in, and arrested him on the spot. Inside his bag, rope, gloves, and a USB drive. Back at the station, digital forensics uncovered audio recordings, grainy, silent footage of women swimming alone. Some of them matched unsolved cases. Dorian Walsh was charged, but the case was far from over. Authorities now faced the daunting task of uncovering the full scope of his activities, identifying the women in the recordings, and, most critically, ensuring that no more names would ever be added to his list. Thanks to Amelia's courage and foresight, they finally had their first real chance to stop a killer. In the weeks following Dorian Walsh's arrest, something remarkable began to happen, not in the courtroom or evidence rooms, but in the hearts of those whose lives Amelia Bennett had touched. Her mother, Margaret, once trembling outside the police station, clutching her daughter's photo, now carried an unshakable sense of purpose. She had transformed her grief into advocacy, launching the Silent Waters Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to protecting women from digital stalking and raising awareness about online safety. Margaret began speaking at schools, swim clubs, and self-defense workshops across London, sharing raw, personal insight born from tragedy, and warning others with the strength only a mother's loss could carry. Margaret no longer saw herself as just the mother of a victim. She had become a voice for those who were never given one. At the South London Aquatic Centre, where Amelia once taught nervous toddlers and anxious adults how to swim, a wall was dedicated in her honor, adorned with photos, handwritten notes, and a plaque that read, "She taught us how to breathe, even when the world felt like it was drowning us." For Inspector Grace Holloway, the case changed everything. She had handled dozens of missing persons investigations before, but Amelia haunted her, not just because of the brutality or the cunning of the killer, but because Amelia had tried to help solve her own murder. Her journals, voice notes, and digital breadcrumbs spoke volumes when she no longer could. Grace became more meticulous, more intuitive, more empathetic. She launched a mandatory training program in cyber forensics and victim sensitivity for every homicide investigator under her command. Even the junior cyber analyst who first flagged the Night Ferry 89 inches handle was publicly recognized. She was promoted and asked to lead a newly formed task force focused solely on tracking digital predators, something that hadn't existed before Amelia's case forced the system to evolve. The community changed, too. For a vast and fragmented city like London, something rare happened: unity. Strangers came to light candles in remembrance. Swimming instructors formed an alliance to promote women's safety in recreational spaces. Even tech companies stepped forward, offering to fund anonymous reporting tools that would allow people to safely share concerns about suspicious behavior. Through it all, Amelia's story echoed, not as one of fear, but of awakening. The pain remained, yes, but so did the purpose. Margaret often said in interviews, Amelia didn't just leave behind memories, she left behind a map. And for many, that map became a compass pointing toward prevention, protection, and progress. What began as a nightmare had sparked a movement. More lives were saved, more conversations were had, and women across the country felt seen, heard, and, finally, safer. Amelia's legacy wasn't in how she died, but in what her death forever changed. Amelia Bennett's story began like so many others, full of promise, quiet strength, and unassuming kindness. But in death, she became a symbol of courage, resilience, and the enduring power of a single voice. The final verdict was delivered on a cold November afternoon. Dorian Walsh was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read the sentence, save for the soft sobs of families whose daughters had gone missing years earlier. Margaret Bennett sat in the front row, clutching Amelia's favorite bracelet in both hands. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Justice had finally spoken. But the true resolution didn't come in that courtroom. It came weeks later, when the Silent Waters Foundation launched its first nationwide awareness campaign. The campaign featured images of swimming pools, parks, and quiet city streets, places where women had once felt vulnerable, now reclaimed as spaces of empowerment. The campaign's slogan, "Your voice is your power. Use it." Across London, posters bearing Amelia's name appeared on buses, in underground stations, and on digital billboards. People weren't just remembering how she died. They were remembering how she tried to live. With intuition, purpose, and compassion. Her story led to over 200,000 downloads of personal safety apps. Thousands of women enrolled in self-defense classes. And a permanent shift in how online harassment cases are handled by law enforcement. But perhaps the most powerful moment came during a quiet vigil held on the anniversary of her death. Hundreds gathered at the now restored Croydon Aquatic Centre. Flowers floated gently across the surface of the pool. Margaret spoke softly to the crowd. Amelia didn't die because she was weak. She died because she was strong enough to speak up. She didn't run from fear, she faced it. And in doing so, she cleared a path for the rest of us. As candlelight danced across the water, something shifted in the air. A quiet promise that Amelia's light would never go out. Because in every woman who speaks up, in every survivor who steps forward, and in every system now awakened to dangers once ignored, Amelia lives on. Her story didn't end in tragedy. It ended in transformation.